All right, in this lecture, we're going to learn a little bit more about the Photoshop environment, more specifically, the palettes. So as you can see, if you're totally new to Photoshop, there are a lot of different options and tools and buttons and sections all around the perimeter of the application. And it can be extremely daunting because if it's new to you, then it seems like there'd be a big learning curve. And I'm not going to lie, in some cases there is a big learning curve with a software like Adobe Photoshop. But once you get the hang of it and you use it enough, it will be pretty easy for you, and it will kind of come as a muscle memory. In fact, I had to kind of relearn what all these things were called because I use it so much that I don't need to know what the buttons are called or what the tools are called or what each section is called, whether it's a palette or a panel or a workspace, so on and so forth. So I kind of had to brush up on those terms on the environment so that I could properly teach you. So basically what I mean there is once you kind of get the hang of it, it will become second nature and kind of muscle memory, and you won't really need to know all the specific details. So we're going to jump into the palettes, and I'll let you know what that's all about. So palettes are basically everything that you see all throughout the perimeter of the software. So this would be the tools palette, and we've learned about the tools. We've kind of did an overview on each of the tools here. So this is a palette. Palette is this actual thing that we can choose the options from. So right here is our tools palette, and up here is our options palette. The options palette basically will change depending on what tool you choose. So if I choose the marquee tool, my options will change. That will let me to feather the selection, choose the style. If I'm using the lasso tool, I can change the different types of selections. If I'm using the crop tool, I can change the ratio. I can clear the crop, so on and so forth. The brush tool, you can choose the different brushes. So this, you use the options palette quite a bit. Now over here, there are a bunch of different palettes that you can use. I'm just going to expand this so you can see. They also call them, in Photoshop, they call them panels. This full section here is a panel. So I'm opening and closing these panels. So they kind of use the word palette and panel interchangeably. I suppose that's kind of something I've learned as I was looking into this a little bit more. And so here, the most common palettes that you're going to be using when you're designing websites and graphics and modifying images are the layers palette right here. And the layers basically let you create non-destructive edits to your image. So instead of, for example, if I just were to go here in my tools and I took the brush and I made it a little bit bigger here, and I just went and brushed a big circle around me here, that is now on the layer of the actual image. So in theory, I can't change that now. I mean, I can edit undo, but I can't if I say like, oh, I actually want to move this, paintbrush down a little bit or resize it. I can't. I cannot edit this paintbrush stroke that I just created because it is on the layer. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to create a new layer by clicking the new layer button down here. And now I have a new layer where I can do this brush. And now I can modify it. So I can hide it. I can use the move tool and move the location of it. I could change the color of it. I could erase it. And I'm not going to destroy the original image, which is what you want, which is the purpose of using Photoshop. You can create non-destructive edits. So anyway, back here. So this is our layers. You can create multiple layers. You can create groups of layers if you wanted to have multiple different layers within a group. You can rename that group to something here, something like sky. And if you were to edit the sky and do something here, you can add multiple groups. You can have groups within groups, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff in the layers. Channels and paths you don't really use, but if you were doing kind of more advanced edits with photography and graphics, you can play around with these different channels. You can see the blue channel, the green channel, red channel, and you can make modifications to that. But I never use this. And then there are paths. If you were to use the pen tool, and I were to create an actual path, then the work path is right here. But again, I don't use that, so it might not even be worth it for you to play around with that. Adjustments is another popular palette that you use. You can actually make adjustments to the image. So if you want to adjust the brightness and contrast, you can go ahead and do that here. So adjust the brightness and the contrast like so. It will open up here, the little button here in the palette. So it opens up the properties palette. And that will change depending on what you choose. And you can see it also created a non-destructive edit, so I can turn it on and off. You can do other things like hue saturation, color balance, levels. So for example, if I wanted to modify the levels of the image, I could do so like this. And again, that is non-destructive. In our layers, you can go ahead and delete those just by hitting delete. And there are more things here like color. If you wanted to change the foreground and background color of your Photoshop document, if you wanted to, so for example, I'll choose the foreground and I'll make that kind of a red. Now you can see the foreground color I have here in my swatch is red. If I wanted to change the background color, I choose the background here. And I can change that like so. And now basically that means if I were to use a color like a brush, I chose the brush tool, now it will choose the foreground, which will be red. And if you want to change that color, you could do it here or here. You can modify it like so. If you knew the exact color codes, your RGB, you could do that as well. So that's how you use the color. Swatches, you can actually choose from a swatch of what kind of color palette you want to play with. Here is the history and actions palettes. Basically, you can choose specific actions or history items that you've done. So instead of edit undo, if you wanted to go back to a specific history, then you can actually choose when you did that, like so. Actions, basically, you can choose different types of actions. You can download them from the web to do certain things. Like if you wanted to add filters and effects, like so on and so forth, I could choose one of these and turn it on, and it will make that adjustment for me. Kind of like an Instagram filter, so to speak. But a little bit more of advanced move, and you don't really need to do that a lot in web design. I rarely use this. Down here we have properties, we have that. Info, this just lets you know, you can see where your cursor is, you can see the color, and under the cursor, your X and Y position. If you were to make a selection, you could see the height and width. Over here, if you wanted to have a specific height, width, so on and so forth. The brush, if you were to use the brush, you can actually change the presets over here. So you could change the brush tip, you could change the bristles, the length of the stroke, the thickness, the stiffness of the bristles. You could change the angle of the stroke. You could choose the different types of bristle quality there. You could change things like scattering, shape dynamics, color dynamics, lots of different things that you can experiment with. Again, they're just kind of extra features and you don't really need to use them. I've probably opened this palette 4 times in the entire history of me knowing what Photoshop was. So you don't really need to play with that. But again, you can experiment just to see. Some more brush presets. You could just choose presets. Here is your character and paragraph palettes, which lets you choose fonts and your typeface and so on and so forth. So if I were to go ahead and type something like so, I'm going to move that over here. I can modify this. So I'm going to select it and I can modify the font size. I can modify different kerning and line height and so on and so forth. You could change the text height. You could change the color. I could choose a color with the color picker. So if I wanted it to be the sand, color of the sand, then there we go. You could change it to italic, uppercase. You know, if you were going to use subscript and superscript, underline, strike through, everything like that. You can play around with these different settings in your character and paragraph. If you were to use center, left, and right, justification. And there's a bunch of different things you could do with your text using that. Up here in my options, you can also play around with it here instead of down here. You could play around with it here. And usually this is where I play around with my text settings. And you could cancel that edit, or you can commit the edit. And so there we go. And you can see here we have another layer with that. So it's a non-destructive edit if I don't want that text or if I want to modify it in the future. And basically that is a simple rundown of the palettes. Another cool thing you could do if you don't use certain palettes, you can make custom workspaces. So up here you could see Essentials gives you the essential palettes. You could choose different things like painting, and it will give you different presets and palettes. I have my own custom workspace. You can go New Workspace, name the workspace, and you can remove by right-clicking the different palettes, and you can close them or remove them or totally adjust them, like so. If I wanted to put that up there, if I wanted to move this one down here, if you wanted this to be larger, if you wanted to move this all together, you could do that. If you want to dock it back in the side, you just pull it to the left side of the screen. And I've created my own custom workspace called Brad's Workspace, which just minimizes things to what I use. So I use adjustments, styles, and layers. I use these palettes here, the ones that we were just playing around with, and I leave my toolbar and my options. And you can do that right here if you want to create your own workspace. So I'll see you in the next lecture where we're going to learn a little bit more about the menu, because there are a lot of options to play around with here.